The wind howled across the plain, dragging sheets of dust like torn veils through the dying light. A storm threatened on the horizon, its bruise-colored clouds twisting in restless spirals, but he rode on, hunched in the saddle, each hoofbeat drumming like a warning. His horse's breath steamed in the cooling air, nostrils flaring, hooves striking sparks off the stones that littered the narrow path. He did not slow. A man like him had little patience for shelter or delay. The road behind was empty, the road ahead uncertain, and perhaps that suited him best, for he had been drifting too long between places that promised nothing and faces that gave less. His name was not yet spoken in this land, and he preferred it that way. A man's past was a burden that could be twisted by those who wished him harm, and he carried enough regrets already. He had once fought for others, men who had claimed loyalty, women who had whispered vows, and all had scattered when the world turned hard. He had buried one dream beneath the frozen soil of a winter grave, and left another behind on a battlefield drenched in smoke. What remained was this: a man on horseback, traveling with little more than the clothes on his back, a worn revolver at his side, and a silence inside him that felt heavier than any pack. The storm's edge caught the first ridge as he dismounted to lead his horse through a shallow creek, its surface trembling with the approach of rain. That was when he heard it. Footsteps not his own. Quick, desperate, and light, like a deer crashing through brush, yet distinctly human. He straightened, one hand brushing the revolver's grip, the other steadying the reins. From between the crooked trunks of cottonwoods, she burst forth, a girl not more than 17, much streaking her dress, hair undone, eyes wide with terror that seemed to swallow the dusk. She almost fell against him, gasping for breath, her small hands gripping his coat as though he were an anchor pulled from nowhere. He steadied her, surprised not by her presence but by the way she looked at him, as if she had run not away from something but directly toward him, as though fate itself had pointed her across the barren ground. "They'll kill her," she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. "You have to come. Please. My mother." The words broke off in a sob. He stiffened, unused the pleas, unused the strangers whose lives spilled into his path without warning. He opened his mouth to tell her he was no savior, that he had no quarrel with anyone's family, but the words did not rise. Instead, he looked into her eyes, dark, brimming, burning with fear and yet refusing to let go of hope, and he was reminded of another time, another cry he had ignored, one that had ended in silence too permanent to forget. His jaw tightened. "Who?" he asked simply. She glanced over her shoulder as though the very shadows pursued her. "My mother. My uncles. They've beaten her. They." She swallowed hard. "They shaved her. They said she's shamed them. I can't. She'll die if I don't." The wind ripped at her words, but he heard enough. The image struck him like a blade, a woman, broken by those who claimed kinship, stripped of dignity. He had seen cruelty before, in war, in greed, in men who twisted blood ties into chains. He knew its shape, and he hated it with a quiet, steady hate. "Where?" Her relief was so sudden it looked like pain. She clutched his sleeve and pulled him forward, stumbling as she tried to lead, though her breath came ragged, her strength nearly spent. He caught her arm, steadied her. "Slow," he said. "I need to know what we're walking into." She shook her head fiercely. "There's no time. They'll finish what they started." The urgency in her voice was unshakable. Against his better judgment, he nodded once, tied the reins loose to his wrist, and let her pull him into the growing storm. The path wound between fields left fallow, weeds strangling the soil, a fence broken in half as if abandoned years ago. He could see the faint outline of buildings in the distance, crouched low against the earth, and a dread press against his chest, not his own but the weight of what she feared. Every step brought the storm closer, the air heavy, the first drops cold against the skin. "Tell me your name," he said at last, his voice low. She hesitated, as if names themselves were dangerous things. "Myra," she whispered. He gave no reply, for his name was not hers to know yet. They moved together, two shadows across the empty fields, the horse snorting uneasily as thunder cracked overhead. Halfway to the homestead, they heard voices. Men, rough and careless, drifting from the trees like smoke from fire. Myra froze, her nails digging into his sleeve. He guided her down behind a fallen log, the horse pressed close beside them. The men's laughter was jagged, harsh, the kind born not of joy but of cruelty satisfied. "They'll come back," she mouthed. He studied them from the shadows. 3 figures, broad-shouldered, carrying the ease of those who believed no one would challenge them. Kin to the girl, perhaps, but kinship meant little when poisoned by power. He could take them, maybe, but not without risk, and not yet. He needed to see the truth before the fight began. They waited until the men passed, their voices fading into the storm, before Myra tugged him again. At last, the homestead came into view. A sagging roof, shutters banging in the wind. No smoke from the chimney. Silence, except for the storm. She slowed, her breath shaking. He felt the tremor in her hand as she pointed toward the door. Inside. The weight of her desperation pressed on him, stronger than the storm, heavier than the revolver at his side. He had told himself he was finished with causes, finished with taking on the battles of strangers. Yet here he was, standing in the threshold of another man's cruelty, guided by a girl whose courage outstripped her years. He did not know why he had followed her, only that turning away felt impossible. He placed his hand against the door, testing the frame. It yielded with a groan. The smell of damp wood and blood hit him at once, faint but unmistakable. Myra moved past him, rushing inside with a broken cry. He followed, revolver drawn, eyes sweeping the gloom. The room was dim, shadows cut by flashes of lightning through the windows. The furniture lay overturned, a chair splintered, a cloth torn across the floor. And there, against a far wall, a figure huddled on the ground. A woman, older, her hair shorn brutally close to the scalp, her face a map of bruises, eyes swollen, lips cracked. She raised her head slowly as her daughter fell beside her, and the sound that came from Myra's throat was not words but grief itself, raw and shattering. The man stood still, revolver hanging loose in his hand, as the weight of the scene settled around him. This was not war, not soldiers on a field, but it was cruelty all the same, and somehow it felt sharper, more intimate. A family had done this. Blood had turned against blood. The woman's eyes flickered to him, searching, wary. She tried to speak, but only a rasp emerged. He crouched low, holstering the revolver, his gaze steady. He did not touch her, not yet, for some wounds were too raw for a stranger's hand. Myra clutched her mother's shoulders, whispering promises, apologies, fragments of hope. The storm outside roared against the house, thunder shaking the walls, but inside there was only this fragile moment. 3 souls drawn together by violence, 2 of them broken, one uncertain why he was here at all, yet knowing he could not walk away. A choice was before him, though he had not spoken it, though he had not even allowed himself to shape it fully in his mind. The girl had found him in the storm, and now he stood at the edge of her mother's ruin. Whatever came next would bind him to their fate, or leave him branded by the silence of turning away. He looked at Myra, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she held her mother close. She met his gaze through the haze of sorrow, and in her eyes he saw not just desperation but question, a plea deeper than words. Will you stand with us, or will you vanish like all the others? The thunder rolled again, shaking the floor beneath their feet, and he knew the men would return. The storm was not yet broken, but in this dim room, beneath the scars of cruelty, something had begun, something he could no longer ignore. The storm outside deepened, thunder shattering the silence like a drum of war. Yet inside the ruined homestead the stillness clung like a second skin. Myra clung to her mother's shoulders, whispering broken words, as if the force of her voice alone might hold back death. The woman's breathing rattled, shallow but persistent, a fragile defiance against the brutality she had endured. He stood near the doorway, revolver holstered but hand hovering close, eyes scanning the shadows as though cruelty itself might slip back through the cracks in the walls. The mother's shaved scalp gleamed beneath each flash of lightning, a mark not only of humiliation, but of calculated violence. It was not enough for her tormentors to bruise her flesh. They had stripped her dignity, branding her with shame meant to linger long after pain faded. He had seen such act before, in war and in vengeance, when men wanted to kill not just the body but the spirit that resided within. It left scars that never healed, and he wondered whether this woman, who looked at him now with weary eyes, could bear such weight and still rise. Myra brushed dirt from her mother's cheek with trembling hands, her voice steadying as she spoke in low tones. "You're safe now. I brought someone. He'll help us." The girl's certainty startled him. She spoke of him as though he had already chosen their side, as though his presence alone carried the promise of salvation. He felt the burden of that expectation settle on his shoulders heavier than any pack. The woman tried to speak, her lips moving soundlessly before a whisper escaped. "Why?" The question was directed not at Myra but at him, her swollen eyes fixed on his face with a mixture of suspicion and desperation. Why had he come? Why was he here? Why did he not turn away like all the others who had seen her suffering and done nothing? He could not answer. He was no savior, no righteous champion. He had wandered too long through the ashes of his own failures to believe himself capable of saving another. Yet something in her gaze, and in Myra's unwavering faith, bound him in silence. He crouched low, not touching her but lowering his voice so it carried weight. "Because no one deserves this," he said. His words were simple, but they were all he had. For a moment, she closed her eyes, as if the sentence itself was a balm. Myra pressed her forehead against her mother's shoulder, and the three of them remained in fragile stillness, the storm their only witness. But stillness never lasted. Footsteps thudded outside, muffled by the rain but unmistakable. Voices rose, coarse and careless, the same tones he had heard earlier. The in-laws had returned, perhaps drunk on cruelty, perhaps eager to finish what they had begun. He stood quickly, motioning for Myra to remain silent. Her mother tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her, forcing her back against the wall with a groan. He crossed to the window, peering through the crack in the shutter. Shapes moved in the downpour. 3 men again, lanterns swaying, their figures distorted by the sheets of rain. One carried a length of rope. Another dragged a bottle from his belt. Their laughter cut through the storm, jagged and merciless. Myra's hand found his sleeve. Her grip was iron despite her trembling. "They'll kill her this time," she whispered, voice choked with dread. His instinct screamed to move, to act, but caution rooted him. 3 armed men in the open could overwhelm him if he stepped out too soon. He needed advantage, a moment that turned fear into hesitation. The revolver's weight reassured him, yet bullets alone could not silence the deeper wound. This was not a random band of marauders but kin, men who believed blood gave them the right to destroy their own. The door rattled as a fist slammed against it, then another. The woman flinched. Myra pressed herself closer, and he drew the revolver, cocking the hammer back with a sound sharp enough to slice through their terror. He positioned himself by the frame, shadows hiding his stance, breath slow, every muscle taut. "Open up," one of the men bellowed. "We're not done with her yet." The words ignited something in him. Anger surged, not wild but steady, forged from years of watching men wield cruelty like a weapon. He had buried friends to such malice. He had lost love to it. He would not stand aside this time. Before he could act, however, a new sound pierced the storm, a low whistle, sharp and controlled. The men outside halted, muttering, lantern swinging. A shape moved at the edge of the fields, dark against darker sky. Another figure, silent, watching. The intruder stepped forward, rain glistening off a weathered coat, hair tied back, a long hunting knife strapped at his side. His presence carried no noise but the storm itself. The men outside shifted uneasily, as though the weight of his stare unsettled them more than the threat of a gun. The silent figure raised one hand, palm open, then drew it slowly across his throat in a gesture that needed no words. The 3 men cursed, spat into the mud, but retreated a step. The one with the bottle hurled it toward the field, glass shattering, liquid hissing in the rain. With a snarl, they turned back toward the trees, muttering threats that promised return. Inside the homestead, Myra exhaled a sob of relief, clutching her mother tighter. He lowered the revolver slightly, eyes narrowing on the figure who had intervened. A stranger, yet not wholly stranger. Something about him marked him as both part of this land and apart from it. The figure lingered a moment longer, ensuring the men were gone, then turned his gaze toward the house. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a face scarred by weather and conflict, unreadable but not cruel. Then he vanished into the storm, swallowed as though he had never been there. Myra looked at him, eyes wide. Who was that? He did not answer. He had no answer. The man's silence was its own language, and for now that was enough. He re-secured the door, wedging a broken chair against it, then crouched beside Myra and her mother again. The woman's breath shuddered, her eyes half-lit but watching him with a flicker of something new, hope fragile as it was. He poured water from his canteen, coaxing her to drink, then tore strips from his own shirt to bind her bruised wrists. His hands were rough but careful, each motion deliberate, as though he sought not only to mend her flesh but to restore some piece of the dignity stolen from her. Myra whispered thanks, over and over, though her voice quavered with exhaustion. He shook his head. "Save your strength. They'll be back." The words darkened the room, yet they were truth. He would not lie to them with false comfort. Survival depended on readiness, not illusions. 4 hours they remained in the wreckage, the storm pounding above, Myra dozing at last against her mother's shoulder, the woman drifting in and out of restless sleep. He sat nearby, revolver across his lap, eyes fixed on the door. In the silence, his mind wandered to his own past, the night he had once failed to protect, the morning he had buried the one who had trusted him. Regret gnawed at him, but with it came resolve. This time he would not falter. When dawn broke, pale and bruised, the storm had passed, leaving the field soaked and the homestead sagging under the weight of water. Myra stirred first, rising stiffly, her eyes ringed by sleeplessness. She stepped outside, scanning the horizon, but returned quickly, voice hushed. "They are not here." He nodded but remained alert. Absence did not mean safety. He turned to the woman, who now managed to sit upright against the wall. Her gaze held his steadily for the first time. "You could leave," she rasped, her voice raw. "No shame in it. They are not yours to fight." He met her stare, unflinching. "And if I walk away, what happens?" Her silence was answer enough. "You deserve more than survival," he said quietly. "You deserve to be free of them." She closed her eyes, pain and gratitude warring across her features. Myra reached for his hand then, gripping it tightly, her strength surprising. "We can't do this alone," she whispered. He allowed the weight of her words to settle, then gave the smallest nod. The choice had been made long before he admitted it aloud. He was bound to them now, not by blood, but by necessity, by conscience, by something he could not name yet refuse to deny. Outside, a crow wheeled overhead, its cry harsh in the fragile morning. He rose, holstered the revolver, and stepped toward the doorway, the broken field stretching before him. Somewhere in the distance, the men would be plotting their return. Somewhere, too, the silent stranger lingered, watching, waiting. The battle was not yet here, but it was coming. He felt it in the weight of the air, in the bruises on the woman's face, in the unyielding determination in Myra's eyes. The storm had only cleared the ground. The fire was yet to come. The morning stretched long and heavy, as though the storm had drained not just the sky but the earth itself. Mist clung to the fields, curling low around the broken fences and rotted posts. The homestead crouched in silence, walls sagging beneath their scars. Yet within its ruin, 3 souls gathered strength for what lay ahead. Myra kept close to her mother, tending each bruise, each raw line of the razor's cruelty, her hands shaking yet steady enough to show her refusal to surrender. The woman endured her daughter's touch with quiet resolve, her eyes never straying from the doorway where he stood, revolver resting against his thigh. He felt the weight of their gaze without turning. He had given no oath, spoken no promise, yet his presence itself had become a vow. He had chosen to remain, and in that choice lay consequence. He knew the men would return, and not alone. Kin such as theirs would not forgive defiance lightly. Humiliation demanded blood, and vengeance was a currency paid quickly in this land. He had no illusions. What was coming would be brutal, final. Yet he could not turn back, for to walk away would be to betray not only them but the fragments of himself still capable of honor. The silent figure who had intervened the night before had not returned. Whether ally or phantom, his absence carried mystery. Yet he felt the man's presence lingering at the edges of the land, as though unseen eyes weighed his every move. He wondered if the stranger watched to test him, to measure the worth of his decision when the reckoning arrived. Myra's mother shifted, drawing breath with effort. Her voice was hoarse but firm. "They'll come with fire." She did not ask whether he was ready. She spoke as one who had already accepted the truth. He glanced at her then, meeting her weary gaze. "Let them come," he said, voice even, though inside he felt the tremor of anticipation coiled tight. The day passed in tense silence. Each sound beyond the fields tightened their nerves. Myra gathered water from the creek, her steps quick and wary. He walked the perimeter, mapping the land, noting where the ground dipped and where cover might be found. He checked the revolver again and again, each click of the chamber a reminder that bullets were few and time shorter still. By dusk, the mist had lifted, leaving the land stark and exposed beneath a crimson sky. The horizon burned with the glow of approaching lanterns. Voices carried across the open ground, louder this time, harsher, a pack emboldened by numbers. He counted at least 7 shadows, men armed with clubs, knives, and rifles slung carelessly yet ready to raise. Their laughter reached the homestead before their footsteps did, the kind of laughter that fed on fear. Myra gripped her mother's hand until her knuckles whitened. He motioned for them to stay low, his voice a whisper sharp as steel. "Stay behind the wall. Don't move unless I tell you." Then he stepped out into the yard, revolver drawn, his frame tall against the fading light. The men halted a few paces away, surprised by the sight of him. Their leader, a broad man with a scar running from temple to jaw, spat into the dirt and sneered. "You've no place here, stranger. That woman's ours to deal with. Blood keeps its own house." He met the man's gaze with cold steadiness. "You call it blood, but what you've done isn't kinship. It's cruelty." The words rolled into the gathering dusk like stones. For a heartbeat, silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of lantern flames. Then laughter erupted, jagged and mean. The leader raised his rifle, resting it casually on his shoulder. "You think you'll stop us? 1 man against 7? You'll die for a woman who isn't even yours." Before he could reply, a movement stirred at the edge of the field. The silent figure emerged from the shadows, knife glinting in his hand, both slung across his back. His expression remained unreadable, yet his presence alone shifted the air. The men faltered, their bravado dimming as unease crept in. 2 against 7 was no small advantage, but it was enough to seed doubt. The leader snarled, rallying his men with a curse. "Then we'll kill you both." The first shot cracked like thunder. He had fired before the leader's rifle even left his shoulder. The man staggered, dropped to the mud, lantern light spilling across his fallen body. Chaos exploded. Shouts, curses, the clash of boots in the dirt. He moved with precision, each shot deliberate, conserving the scant rounds he possessed. 1 man fell clutching his chest. Another spun backward, his rifle clattering away. The silent ally struck like a ghost, blade flashing in the lantern glow, slipping between shadows to drag foes down before they could raise their weapons. Yet numbers pressed hard. A club struck his shoulder, spinning him into the wall, pain igniting like fire down his arm. He gritted his teeth, swung the revolvers but into the attacker's skull, and felt bone give beneath the blow. Blood spattered the dirt. Another came from the side, knife slashing, grazing his ribs before he twisted away and fired point-blank. Myra screamed inside the house, her voice raw, but he did not look back. He could not. The fight raged too close, too sharp. Each breath tasted of smoke, sweat, and iron. Lanterns crashed to the ground, flames licking the wet earth, sparks flying. The ally fought with ruthless efficiency, silent still, his knife a streak of light, his bowstring snapping once to send an arrow deep into a man's chest. Together they carved through the chaos, 2 figures against the storm, until only 2 of the in-laws remained, one crawling backward through the mud, the other frozen, club trembling in his hands. The leader lay in the dirt, unmoving. Silence descended, broken only by ragged breaths and the distant cry of night birds. The last man dropped his weapon and fled, stumbling into the darkness, his cowardice louder than his curses. The yard reeked of blood and smoke. Bodies sprawled where they had fallen, lanterns gutted, shadows long across the earth. He lowered a revolver at last, chest heaving, ribs aching where the knife had cut. The silent ally wiped his blade clean on a fallen man's coat, then turned his gaze toward him. For a moment, their eyes locked, 2 men bound not by words but by survival. Then the stranger gave the faintest nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, before fading once more into the darkness. Myra rushed from the house, tears streaking her face, her mother following more slowly, supported by the wall. She fell to her knees beside him, hands frantic on his arms, searching for wounds. He caught her wrist gently, steadying her. "I'm all right," he said, though pain burned beneath his ribs. Her mother's eyes glistened as she looked at him. The question hung unspoken. Why had he risked his life for them? Why had he stood when no one else would? He knew the answer now, and the weight of it pressed against his chest until he could no longer hold it back. He rose, blooded but unbroken, and faced them both, his voice low but carrying the force of certainty. "I'll marry her now." The words fell heavy, stunning the air into silence. Myra's breath caught, her eyes widening, though not with fear. Her mother's lips parted, trembling as though she could not decide between protest and blessing. "I'll marry her now," he repeated, louder this time, not as plea but as vow. Not for pity, not to save face, but because no one else will protect you as blood should, because no one else will stand where I've chosen to stand. If shame was their weapon, then let honor be mine. Myra's tears spilled freely, her hands covering her mouth as she shook with emotion. Her mother closed her eyes, a sob escaping, not of despair but of release, as though the chains laid upon her had finally cracked. The night held them in its stillness. Around them lay ruin, blood, bodies, ash, but within that circle of pain burned something unyielding. He had made his choice, one that bound his life not to vengeance but to protection, to a future carved out of survival and dignity. The silence stretched long before Myra spoke, her voice fragile yet fierce. "Then we will endure. Together." The fires smoldered in the yard, casting their shadows against the broken walls. The battle was over, but its echoes lingered, and the path ahead was uncertain. Yet for the first time in years, he felt the weight of purpose settle not as burden but as armor. He glanced toward the horizon, where the stranger had vanished, wondering if they would cross paths again, or if his silent ally had simply been a spirit of the storm, a figure meant to guide him toward this choice. The answer did not matter. What mattered was here, Myra, her mother, the vow spoken in blood and fire. The reckoning had come, and in its aftermath, he had chosen not escape but bond, not silence but declaration. The price was high, the wounds deep, yet within the ashes of shame, something unbreakable had taken root. The dawn would come, and with it new trials, new dangers, but he no longer faced them alone.